My friends, Germany finally agreed to send Leopard 2s to Ukraine. Why are they not sending the good stuff? The Leopard 2A4, the Leopard 2A5, all the Leopard 2s, why are they not sending the good stuff to Ukraine? German tanks will once again roll on the steppes of Ukraine. And here's a new episode of NATO Wunderwaffen Season 5, Leopard 2.
What do you think?
Whoa, very nice.
The Russians are already making memes about it. After the Panthers and the Tigers, now the Leopards. But in reality, the Russian military command fears the arrival of fresh Ukrainian tank formations. And this is why I want to stop the Reddit and Twitter hordes that keep talking about the Ukrainian spirit. Ukraine doesn't care about the picture you put in your bio or your little tweets. This is what they need. All this good stuff, good old steel. Here an article from Forbes. Leopard 2 tanks from all over Europe are heading to Ukraine. Der Spiegel says Ukraine is to receive 80 Leopard 2 main battle tanks from Europe. Notice how there's also not a single word in the press about the disastrous situation on the front line. Truth is, the number of Soviet-era combat-ready tanks in the armed forces of Ukraine is rapidly decreasing. And Europe can't help them much because they also ran out of T-72 tanks. If we expect Ukraine to launch a counteroffensive for spring, they absolutely need these tanks because Russian forces seriously fortified their positions all over the front. And Ukrainians need armored formations to punch through. Just take a look at the hundreds of Leopard 2s available throughout Europe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I read, the Leopard 2A4 was developed in the late 1980s. And the 2A6 version dates from the early 2000s. And they're equipped with a more accurate Rheinmetall 120mm L55 smoothbore gun. 32 Leopards are now confirmed for Ukraine. The first batch consists of 14 2A6 from Germany, 14 models 2A4 from Poland, and 4 2A4s from Canada. On top of that, there's the possibility of 20 2A4s from Spain. Norway wants to send 8. Portugal wants to send 4 units of the 2A4 model. Denmark wants to send 6 late generation Leopard 2s. And the Netherlands, they're generous, they want to send all of their 18 units. I present you the new Dutch carbon-free tank battalion. So that would be an additional 56 for a total of 88 Leopard 2s. Boys, it's starting to add up. Germany also said that they could send another 66 in the coming month. And Spain an extra 33. The wild card is Sweden with its 120 units of the Stridsvagn 122, an upgraded variant of the Leopard 2A5. My understanding from this entire situation is that whenever the mainstream media says that maybe the West will send some equipment to Ukraine, it's just to prepare you mentally for that. All the debates on TV whether to send Leopard 2s or not are clearly a smokescreen. The tanks were already on their way to Ukraine while everybody was debating. On top of all this, the Polish Prime Minister said, "We are ready to send 60 of our modernized PT-91 tanks as well as 14 Leopard 2 tanks." I was shocked. This is just like the YouTuber Red Effect suggested in his video called "Why Sending Leopard 2 Tanks to Ukraine is Not a Good Thing Yet." I'm not an expert like him regarding tanks, but from my understanding, the PT-91 is a highly upgraded Polish version of the T-72, meaning Ukraine could immediately use it in battle. And Poland has 200 of those. Here, experts believe that Ukrainian troops could fight with Leopard 2s by early spring. To me, this is kind of misleading. Every time a new weapon system delivery was announced, like the German Panzerhaubitze 2000, a month later it was already at the front. So mark my word, Leopard 2s will be seen in combat by the end of February. This entire discussion about how much time it takes to train Ukrainian crews is also a smokescreen. It's very likely that Ukrainian tank crews were trained on how to operate the Leopard 2 months ago, using the incognito private window that you're also familiar with. Welcome to HistoryLegends, here are the latest news of the Russo-Ukrainian war. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you to all of you that have already helped me on Patreon or PayPal, and welcome to the headquarters. Why the Leopard 2? Logistics is like the accountant of war, very boring but vital for victory. If Ukraine is getting Leopard 2s, it's because they don't really have a choice. In my opinion, the Ukrainian army doesn't have many functional tanks left. Ukraine doesn't possess the production capabilities or the supplies to provide its armored formations with Soviet-era spare parts. Why? Because Russia was Ukraine's main supplier for spare parts and maintenance. Up until very recently. And since Ukraine didn't develop an arms industry of its own, well, now they're stuck. That's why sending PT-91s is a great immediate help, but it would just delay the inevitable by maybe 2 months. Ukraine cannot sustain its Soviet-era heavy weapons anymore. According to the Washington Post, Ukraine started the war with 982 combat-ready tanks and another 1,000 in storage. Already by the 26th of April 2022, 2 months into the war, Poland sent Ukraine 240 T-72s. The Czech Republic donated another 40 units. Remember how these were considered super urgent. So we can safely assume that these Polish and Czech tanks were a replacement for battlefield losses. Now don't get me wrong, it doesn't necessarily mean that Ukraine lost 280 tanks in combat. A lack of maintenance can do as much damage as the enemy. Just by firing, it puts stress on the recoil mechanism of the tank. And if a tank cannot fire, what's the point? By mid-June 2022, Volodymyr Karpenko, commander of the logistics of the Ukrainian ground forces, said that Ukraine had lost nearly half of its heavy weapons in the fighting, and more specifically 400 tanks unusable. Now you'll tell me, you're just a hater. Ukraine captured 500 Russian tanks. That's true, but in what conditions did they capture these tanks? Most of these captured tanks were in fact badly damaged, either by mines whose damage under the tank cannot be seen on the picture, or rendered unusable by various ATGMs. Reports indicate that only a handful could actually be reused by the Ukrainians in combat. The remaining majority could only be cannibalized for spare parts, just like the 1,000 left in storage. The other problem that has a direct correlation with this issue is Ukraine's dwindling Soviet-era stockpiles. Once again, most of Eastern Europe have already emptied their stocks. I suppose came a point where fielding Ukrainian formations with Soviet-era heavy weapons became unsustainable. The only reason Ukrainian artillery still fires its D-30 howitzers is because they captured a bunch of stocks during the Kharkov offensive. Other than that, they fully rely on Western ammunition supplies. So the West decided to quickly intervene to stop the bleeding and just send them brand new NATO equipment, like the M777 howitzers. The United States can send thousands of ammo rounds without breaking a sweat. The US government has already sent over 1,155mm rounds to Ukraine, which confirms the about 2,000 to 3,000 rounds used by Ukraine on a daily basis. Western deliveries of Leopard 2s could help re-equip Ukrainian tank brigades with modern NATO-grade equipment, with plenty of spare parts and technicians located in Poland, but also with much-needed high-caliber munitions. The only dilemma was to convince Germany to agree to the deal. It's not crazy to think that Ukrainian tank crews went to Poland and already got months of training on Leopard 2. Now I'll be honest, I don't know the learning curve from a T-64 or T-72 towards a Leopard 2. But it's certainly faster than starting from scratch and training a complete tank noob like me. So if sending NATO tanks to Ukraine solves a lot of logistical problems, it also brings a whole new array of organizational issues. Here's what Lieutenant General Mark Hertling had to say on Twitter. He served 37 years in armor, served on M60, M60A1, M60A2, M1, M1A1, M1A2, was a tank platoon leader, a company commander 2 times, and led Cavalry Squadron S3 in combat, and much more. He said Ukrainian army commanders who had talked with want tanks, but have admitted they struggle with logistics, repair parts, getting to the right places, and resupply. He said it, not me. He continues, some M1 Abrams repairs require part replacements, requiring many high-tech spare parts to be in a PLL. Other replacements require pulling things to a log center, like sights and FUPPs. This is the tank's full-up power pack. It includes the Abrams engine, transmission, and all cooling apparatus. Since all this maintenance can only be done in Poland, he noted that it's a 500-mile supply line from Donbass to Poland. So you can imagine the organizational nightmare. Also in his view, Leopard 2s would be less of a burden for Ukraine than Abrams. And there's one thing I will add to his analysis. It's true that the supply lines will be crazy. If all these factories and repair shops were in Ukraine, the Russians would bomb the hell out of it. Not only would you lose a lot of equipment, but all the technicians that take months to train. It would essentially be like the Allied bombardments on Germany in 1944 and 1945. And currently, Ukrainian repair shops have to be constantly on the move to avoid these missile strikes, which further reduces their efficiency. But at least if all the factories and the maintenance centers are located in Poland, Russia cannot bomb these places. And this is why Britain even wants to build a huge arms factory in Poland right next to the Ukrainian border. Now keep in mind that a Ukrainian tank brigade at full strength is 100 tanks strong. 88 units of Leopard 2s are about to be assembled and sent to Ukraine, so we're roughly at 1 tank brigade. This is quite significant, as long as the Leopards are deployed together as one formation, and not sprinkled piecemeal all across the front. But I don't think they will make this huge mistake. NATO intends to fully equip 2 newly created Ukrainian Army Corps in Poltava and Dnipro, with full #NATO heavy weapons for the spring counteroffensive. The tanks are meant to storm Russian defenses on the Zaporozhye line and then push towards Crimea and the Sea of Azov to cut the Russian army in two. Other than that, the problem that makes many Western analysts very uncomfortable is that there comes a point where quantity beats quality. 3 T-72s might be defeated by 2 Leopard 2s, but 6 T-72s will stand their ground against 4 Leopard 2s. And 9 T-72s will definitely defeat 6 Leopard 2s. And that's without even taking into account the combat experience of Russian crews with their T-72 or T-90 tanks. I had a very interesting discussion with Brian from the New Atlas regarding tank maintenance. It's a topic he's very familiar with because he was an electro-optical ordnance repairman and worked on night vision, thermal sights, fire control, and optics on the M1A1 Abrams. Essentially, even during peacetime, it was a nightmare for the Marine Corps to maintain and repair the Abrams. So imagine in a full-out war. We talked about the fact that the Leopard 2s are very heavy. They weigh around 60 tons. The Abrams even more at 70 tons. And that's a problem in rural Ukraine where roads and bridges are only meant to sustain 45 tons. So along the Leopard 2s, you also need a bunch of engineering vehicles and pontoon crossing equipment. Leopard 2 tank crews might be very limited on where they can cross rivers, and we'll have to know the exact locations where this will be possible. As you can imagine, this is going to add yet another layer of difficulty for Ukrainian military planners. I'm just speculating, but it might be less problematic if the Leopard 2s are mainly used for offensive operations. The tanks will have to cross rivers using pontoon bridges or bridge laying equipment anyway. Invincible Leopard 2. Whether Russian or Western, everyone agrees that the Leopard 2 is a formidable weapon. Yet it still lost its invincible status when Turkey rushed some Leopard 2A4s into Syria in December 2016. By late December, Islamic State militants incapacitated 10 Leopard 2A4s using Russian Kornet anti-tank missiles and various IEDs. It was a PR disaster for Germany. Now think about it, this was against guerrilla fighters. In Ukraine, Russian infantry units like the VDV paratroopers have 1 cornet per squad or platoon. They have better training, better cohesion. Imagine the damage they can inflict. There are even Russian Telegram groups showing detailed diagrams of the Leopard 2, showcasing all its weak points. In this article, German newspaper Focus explained that the Leopard 2A4 has been designed for Cold War frontal duels against Soviet tanks. So its armor is very strong at the front. However, the tank is less armored in the rear and on the sides, making these areas more vulnerable. In the fighting for the city of Al-Bab against Islamic State militants, the Turkish Leopard 2s were mainly fired at from the rear or from the sides by anti-tank missiles. The missiles could penetrate directly into the tower of the German tanks. For sure, these high losses were directly blamed on the way the Turkish army employed these Leopard 2s. And to be honest, there is some truth to it. Rather than using the tanks in a combined arms force, with artillery, IFBs and strong infantry support to fight off enemy ATGM crews, the Turkish tanks were isolated on the hilltop and used like artillery with direct fire support. Their position was not guarded by a proper defensive perimeter. Enemy units infiltrated the position and ambushed the tanks at close range. As you can see on this map, all the Leopard 2s were destroyed relatively in the same area. The weather also didn't help. It was cloudy and it was snowing, meaning that drones and the Air Force could not support the advance of the Turkish armored formations. 2 years later, in 2018, Kurdish YPG fighters published a video depicting a Turkish Leopard 2 being struck by a Russian Concourse anti-tank missile. And here's the aftermath. So learn the lessons, boys. The attack is more devastating if you tap it from the rear. The same lack of doctrine and poor tactics have also led to the loss of 20 Abrams by the Saudi army in Yemen. I'll give you a historical parallel. At the Battle of Courtrai in 1302, elite French mounted knights did not properly recon the area and launched a frontal charge through swamps against tight Flemish pikemen formations protected by a trench. It was a massacre. That didn't mean that mounted knights were useless. 2 years later, the French army got its revenge. They waited for the Flemish infantry to attack and break rank. This is when the French cavalry flanked them in open terrain. Or like at Patay in 1429, shortly after Jeanne d'Arc's victory at Orleans, 180 mounted knights, led by La Hire, on their own, attacked 5,000 English soldiers, mainly archers in column formation. The French charged before the archers could form their lines. It was a slaughter. The French knights lost 3 KA, and the English over 2,500. This goes to show that the quality of the equipment is very important, but the doctrine is even more important. The last thing I want to talk about is something that nobody seems to care about online. The fact that these Leopard 2s have never faced an enemy with more firepower and aerial superiority. There are more and more holes in Ukraine's air defense coverage. Like here when the Russians launched an Iskander missile and destroyed an entire S-300 battery near Kharkiv. What if the Leopard 2s attack in open terrain and then they have to face Russian fighter jets or Ka-52 alligators and their anti-tank missiles? We don't even know how the Leopards would fare against rockets and artillery shells. In theory, the rounds should bounce back. But let's say the shell explodes really close to the tank. I'm sure the explosion can at least detract the tank or heavily damage the gun barrel. Or what if the round airburst right above the tank? I don't know, once again it could damage the gun, but also the optics and the radios, aka it would render the tank unusable. Then what you do, Ukrainians would have to pull it back to the rear, place it on a train, transport it all the way across Poland, Polish engineers will repair it and send it back. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description.